Hi everyone, and welcome to the Edinburgh Swift Cities introduction meeting, where we will find out more about the Swift local group and how you can get involved. So we will be covering the RSPB as an organisation, the wonderful creature that's brought us all together, threats to the population of Swifts, what we can do about it, including the Edinburgh Swift Cities project and the Swift local group, next steps to take, and space for questions at the end. So RSPB was an organisation that was formed by women in 1889, largely by this woman on the left here, Emily Williamson. It was created in response to the use of feathers being used in fashion, and obviously then seriously impacting the populations of birds that they were using the feathers from. So largely the egret bird, which is on our logo still today, and other birds of paradise. Fast forward the whole way up till now, we're the largest nature conservation charity in the UK. I really love sharing this story because I find it very inspiring that you don't really know what sort of impact you might have in 130 years, and that the act and willpower of a few people can result in a lot of positive change. They started out with a leaflet and now RSPB has got a lot of leaflets. So if you type into Google what Swift is, the really sad situation happens where this is what comes up for at least the first page. I think it's a bit of a reflection about where our focus is as a society, and that's obviously very sad. We see it as well in the lost words books, where there's a lot of words that have been taken out of the dictionary to do with nature and more technological words put in instead. But I'm sure I'm speaking to the converted right now who already are quite informed about birds. There are two other birds that people often mistake for a swift, and I've put them up just here for you to be able to guess which ones they are. Yeah, these two other ones are commonly mistaken for them, but there's a few defining characteristics that help us realise which one is the swift. So I'm going to give you a few seconds just now to see if you can decide which one you think is the swift, what the Latin name is, and what the name of the other two birds are. Okay, so what we have here is this one here on the left is our common swift. There's over 100 species and subspecies of swift, but our ones that comes to visit us is the common swift. Its Latin name is Apis apis, and I'm a bit of a geek about Latin names to do with plants and animals because often they give you an indication about the behaviour or characteristics of the plant or animal. So apis in Latin means without foot. Obviously the bird has feet, but it's more an insight into its very weak legs. So the swift spends 10 months flying and it only lands to nest. So it doesn't have very strong legs to be on the ground. It sort of falls over. To start flying, instead of pushing itself off its legs like other birds, it kind of like falls out of the nest and then starts flying again. Although his legs are quite weak, its feet are very strong. So they have 4 front-facing claws that are evolved to grip onto vertical walls when looking for a nest. The other two birds we have here are the swallow and the house martin. And I just wanted to share some silly ways that I remember the difference between these birds to help remind you how to categorise them. I think the sillier and weirder and more random they are, the more memorable they are. So I think about the swallowtails, the Victorian era waistcoat, where they've got long tails at the back, and that's different to our swift that has a short forked tail. The other bird that it commonly gets mistaken for is the house martin, which you can't really see from the picture, but it's got a white belly, the house martin, whereas the swift, although it is actually a sooty brown colour, it appears black in the sky. And what I think about is the very topical white house for the house martin's white belly. So some other characteristics. The swift has got a little white chin. Yeah, there. And that's actually mostly for juvenile swifts, so they tend to lose that as they get older. So they're like the opposite of humans, where they get They lose their white feathers as they grow older. Other ways, as well as the crescent-shaped wings, a friend said that they recognise the swift because it looks like an anchor in the sky, so kind of like having that flat along the top and then curved rounds at the edge, which I think is a nice way to remember. And the short forked tail, as I talked about. The link here, I'll send it separately to the video, but it's just a video of a screaming party of swifts, which is another identifying characteristics of them. It sounds pretty horrible, screaming party, but actually they're just communicating with each other, having a conversation about which nests are occupied and which aren't occupied, so that the young swifts can find somewhere to create their own nests. But I'll send that link separately. So why are swifts so interesting, other than looking pretty cool? So here is our little swift. I've got some fun facts to share. Its body length is 6 inches and its wingspan is 15 inches. It's about a weight of a cream egg. It's got these large, dark, deep-seated eyes, as you can see. They have a row of bristles along the top to reduce the glare of the sun when flying and to keep out debris, because they fly so fast to get some debris in their eyes. They have an average lifespan of about 5.5 years, and they spend more time airborne than any other species, as I said, only landing to nest. The swifts are built for serious speed, stamina, and skill. In terms of speed, they are the fastest flying bird at level height, so at the one height, and they've reached up to recorded speeds of 69.3 miles per hour. They have super close competition to their cousins, the needle-tailed swift, that's been reported to reach up to 105 miles per hour. However, this hasn't been scientifically recorded, so at the minute our swift is still at the top of the game. The swift have incredible stamina. On the map you can see in the yellow, in the northern hemisphere, this is where the swifts go to breed, and that's in the summer. And the blue show in the south hemisphere, mostly above or entirely above the continent of Africa, and that is where they go for winter to feed. There's more insects there. In folklore, the swift, not even in folklore, but people used to believe that the swifts would go into mud over the winter and hibernate. But in 2010, the BTO fitted 9 swifts with geolocators, as pictured here, and released them from the Foilmere Reserve in Cambridge. This one that's tagged is the A320, which isn't a very endearing name for a swift, that's what we've got. And it flew down through France and Spain, along the west coast of the African continent, crossed the Sahara and turned inland at Senegal. It crossed 24 countries before reaching the rainforests of Congo, where it flies above, feeding on insects over the winter. It can cover really large distances over the winter, as you can see. They can move from Mozambique to Angola, South Africa to Nigeria. This one didn't make it down to South Africa, it went more above Malawi and Tanzania. On its return, the swift here flew out west across the Gulf of Guinea, spending 10 days above Liberia on the west coast, before making its final very, very speedy leg. So in 10 days it went from Liberia the whole way back to the Foilmere Reserve, which is pretty epic. Bearing in mind that this tiny little bird is the weight of a cream egg. In terms of its skill, as has been mentioned, it flies the entire time and only landing to nest. It therefore needs to eat, drink, bathe and mate on the wing. In terms of what it eats, it can eat hundreds of flying insects and airborne spiders every day. It stores its food mixed with saliva in a bolus, in a pouch underneath the chin, for later or to take to their chicks. They can travel hundreds of miles in a day searching for food if it's scarce. There was a research project happened in Belfast a few years ago that showed where the swifts would forage, and yeah, some of them travelled up to 20 kilometres in a day to get a better source of food. This is also bearing in mind they tend to avoid bad weather or rain, so say there was rain above a good food source, they would still go around that and find somewhere else. And this is very linked to the foraging research that we're going to do as part of the project. as I'll talk about in a bit. If food is scarce, the adults and chicks can enter a state of torpor for 2 or 3 days. This is where the body's temperature is lowered and the metabolic activity is lowered as well. So there's a frog that does that over the winter and turns almost to ice. It's pretty cool. In terms of drinking, as you can see from the picture, it can fly low over watercourses or catch raindrops. Also when it's catching raindrops and actively choosing to go towards the rain cloud, it tends to slow down a lot so that it can bathe. What I think is the most incredible feat of skill is the swift's ability to sleep while it flies. So it flies up 10,000 feet and remains there during the night in a state of free fall. It goes into a semi-conscious state, also known as the unihemispherical slow wave sleep, where it switches off alternative sides of its brain, sleeping with one eye open to be able to stay on course during the night and be aware of predators. Pretty impressive. In terms of its nesting sites, they are crevice-loving species that used to nest on sea cliffs, which have largely been developed in some places or have too much human activity around them. So they started moving into buildings, which are a very good source for them because they're dry and cool enough. And I'll come back to more about the nesting sites in a bit. This is a picture of the lovely little swiftlets. Adults pair for life. They meet at the nest site every year. They lay between 1 and 3 white eggs, and it takes 37 to 56 days for the hatchlings to fledge. At this point, they're 50 grams. After 4 weeks, the swifts start doing press-ups in the nests, and that's to make sure that they're strong enough for whenever they begin their journey back. So about after 6 weeks, they leave the nests. Normally the adults leave before them to encourage the swiftlets to leave, and they leave when they're ready, so sometimes siblings leave at different times. Yeah, more to come about that. One thing that I would say about them is that although they look very cute in the left-hand picture, just 6 weeks previous whenever they're born, they do look a bit more like dinosaurs, as you can see in the picture to the right. And this leads me to the next question. When do you think swifts evolved? So here's a timeline going back a very long time. I'll give you just 10 seconds. Hopefully you can see it okay. It's quite small writing. This is when the swifts evolved, 60 million years ago, whenever the Tyrannosaurus rex died out. So it's a very long time that the swifts have been around. Despite the fact they've been around for an incredibly long time, in just the last 20 or 30 years, their populations have gravely declined. Between 1995 and 2016, the populations declined by 53%. This is closer to 60% now in 2020. That's why they have amber conservation status and they're an RSPB priority species since 2009. Why is this? Well, it's not fully clear, but there are a few considerations. As we've talked about, the swifts eat insects, and as you might recall empirically that in the last 20 or 30 years, you would have got a lot of insects splattered on the screen in the summer, the windshields in the summer, and now that's not really the case. Another consideration is the increased frequency of intense weather due to climate breakdown. Just this year in April, a lot of swifts were blown off course, off their migration path, and blown across the Mediterranean into Greece. And a lot of swifts were found exhausted and unfortunately died because they were too tired and hungry to get themselves up again to fly, to continue to fly. And of course, it's predicted that these freak weather conditions and storms will increase. What we do know for sure that has been scientifically proven is a decrease in habitat availability. So as we talked about, the swifts nest under the eaves of buildings, and that's a very appropriate home for them to be. However, there's been a lot of development without considering nature. So the nest sites can be filled up during building repairs, roof renovations or insulation. This is obviously a very bittersweet situation where roofs are being insulated, so that's obviously good for heat loss and carbon loss, but an unintentional side effect can be that the nests are destroyed. However, there are a lot of positive case studies whereby the nests have been preserved and the roofing work has been able to happen. And we're working with the National Federation of Roofing Companies to spread awareness about this. In terms of new builds, not all new builds provide a Swift brick, which is another type of home for the Swifts to live in. Same size as the normal bricks, but they've got the little nest behind the bricks that goes in between the brick and the wall. In Edinburgh Council, there's part of the development plan is that it's heavily suggested for Swift bricks to be used for new builds. However, this isn't always carried through, and part of what we aim to do is to get that made more than just a suggestion, that it's a requirement for new builds to have a Swift brick in them, and that would be amazing. Another development that can happen without considering nature is buildings being demolished without realising that there's nest boxes. Unfortunately, this can happen for all sorts of animals. There's a brownfield site in the centre of Edinburgh where I made a Swift nest box just 2 weeks ago called The Forge. It's an outdoor carpentry place. And it will eventually be knocked down for housing developments. And there's a wall there that has bats nesting on it. Yeah, so this sort of thing happens all the time, which is why we need more people on the ground raising their voices about it. So lots of sad news, but we like to focus on the positive. So what can be done? Well, Edinburgh's Swift Cities project aims to protect and enhance Swift populations through conservation and community engagement. We have funding until next August 2021. And it comes on the back of a lot of Swift work that's happened within RSPB and that's been happening in the Edinburgh Council for a long time and with other Swift lovers in the city. As part of the project will be to support setting up a Swift local group. Although you'll have me to support it being set up, the intention is very, very, very much so to be community-led. Ideally, it will be an independently identifying group after the project ends. For that reason, then I want to really get everybody's input into how it's run. So I got so many wonderful, inspiring emails about wanting to come to the talk about the meeting, people with a lot of experience and skills and enthusiasm about the Swifts. So I see my role as more of bringing together people that are already doing Swift work or want to get involved or just generally interested in birds and conservation, and seeing what skills we can create together for the project and to best serve the Swifts. We're, as I said, hoping for it to be a long-term and self-sustaining project where there's enough empowered and trained members to continue it into the future. I'm hoping to support that to happen through monthly meetings until the funding runs out, where we will be exploring different ways to support the Swifts. And there will be a variety of options of capacities and levels of engagement. So obviously everybody's had a pretty horrific year. And we want to just tailor to what you're able to do. So there's definitely a lot of people that want to get involved and might not have the time or energy as much, but there's options for that as well. And there's options for if you've got a lot of time and enthusiasm. It mirrors this quote that I really love. It's about zero waste, but it's very applicable to conservation or any movement really. We don't need a handful of people doing zero waste perfectly. We need millions of people doing it imperfectly. And that's really the only sustainable way that we can move forward. So just to contextualise the Swift local group, there are Swift local groups all across the British Isles and beyond. There's ones in France, in Germany, in Italy, in Spain. So this group would really be part of a larger network all across Europe and beyond of people that care about Swifts and want to protect and enhance their populations. Yeah, so you'll have a wider network of support as well. Here is listed the Swift conservation website and Action for Swifts, and they're really wonderful websites as well that have a lot of information about Swifts, and it's really uplifting to see so many people care. This slide has got some information. It's a bit of an overview of what you can do for Swifts the whole way throughout the year. We will explore all the different things in more detail as we go throughout the year, but I just wanted to give a brief overview. What you can do at any point of the year, independent of the season, is to protect a nest. So that involves looking at swiftmapper.org.uk and seeing if there is an existing nest near you. And protecting a nest is simply adding to your daily walk a route that goes past the nest and just checking to see if it's okay, if it's still there and there's no development happening to it. There's a lot of very positive stories of local people just noticing roofing or building work happening where there's a swift nest, and simply just speaking to the people doing it. And as I said, it's resulted in the roofing work still happening and people getting paid for the work, but the swift nests still being protected, just like working around the nests. Another thing that we can do all the way throughout the year is to appreciate and be aware of the climate breakdown, and what actions we can take within our daily lives to reduce our impact whilst challenging the systemic issues that are creating climate breakdown as well in the larger systems. Keeping aware of pesticide-free behaviours. So pesticides obviously kill insects, and that impacts the amount of food availability for swifts. There's a really great project that I'll talk about in a bit in Edinburgh to do with that. So what we can do in winter is make a swift nest box. There's a video that I will send out to you about how to make a swift nest box. And it's got instructions for doing it yourself, and it's also got a link to buying one pre-made from RSPB. There's also fitting instructions about how to put it up. Another thing we can do in the winter time is to plant trees. So trees support a lot of insect population. So your native hedgerows are really good for that, especially oak and birch as trees as well. They support a lot of insects. What we can do in the spring is install our swift nest boxes, and there's a few ecological and practical conditions to consider for that, which we'll go into more detail about. What else we can do in the spring is wildflower planting. So again, support the insect population, which supports the swifts. We can also prepare for the arrival of swifts. They come at the start of May. And there's a really nice example of people making like swift bunting and having a fundraiser for swifts on the run up so that they could buy more swift nests and wildflower seeds. In the summer, the main focus for our conservation efforts will be doing a lot of surveys and logging them on Swift Mapper, as I mentioned. I'm using it now to really focus our conservation efforts and where we're doing research. So it's a very useful tool, and the more surveys recorded, the better for future and to better understand the needs of the swift. At the start of August, we start to prepare for the departure of the swifts as they make their long journey south. And that is also when the project ends, so we'll be having a bit of a celebration as well. And in the autumn, back round to the start again, we start to plant the swift nests, and autumn's also a good time to plant wildflower seeds as well this spring. So to look at that more linearly, the project is divided up into conservation and community education. In terms of conservation, as I said, we'll be doing swift surveys and supporting others to do the same, protecting existing swift nests to protect them, installing new nests in suitable locations, improving local swift food availability, responding appropriately to conservation casework. So that's basically being aware of different developments that go through the council, and they're available to the public, and learning how to write letters and appropriately respond in terms of suggesting if people have considered swift boxes or swift bricks in their buildings, referring to the council's document about their suggestion to put in swift bricks and swift boxes. Supporting research into foraging behaviours, so that's a really exciting one if you're into research and conservation. We will have a swift ecologist coming across from Belfast and we will also be working with licensed ringers to carry out the fieldwork for this research. However, there will be opportunities to observe this and in some cases to help out with it. The final thing is advocating and campaigning for SWIFTs and getting protection into legislation. So as I mentioned, it's suggested in the council, which is fabulous and creates a really strong foundation for us to build on. But it would be wonderful if it was required to have SWIFT bricks and SWIFT nest boxes. The community education side of things, we will be looking into running workshops about SWIFTs for community groups, campaigning for SWIFTs through raising the SWIFT profile across all sectors, empowering local people to become SWIFT advocates, and contextualising the SWIFT issue within the climate breakdown conversation, keeping in mind COP is now next year in Glasgow. So as I said, there's different levels of involvement depending on what your capacity is right now. There's the SWIFT supporter, the SWIFT advocate, and the SWIFT conservation leader. In terms of SWIFT supporter, that will simply be to do 2 actions for SWIFTs. That could involve doing a survey in the summer and telling one person about SWIFTs. So a really light touch yet effective way to support SWIFTs if you're quite busy. For SWIFT advocate, that would be at least 4 actions for SWIFTs. So perhaps make and install a SWIFT nest box, plant wildflower meadow, monitor a nest over the winter. And that's if you've got a little bit more time but still can't fully commit. The final one is the SWIFT conservation leader, and hopefully a lot of you will be able to do that. And that will be to partake in at least 6 long-term actions for SWIFTs. To keep, for example, keeping up to date with the council development plans and responding, running surveys. Yeah, so the one about the responding to the council development plans, as many people as possible can do that. It won't be like one person's role, and the more responses, the better. Run surveys annually with their own community. Join the local SWIFT group, which is right here, and tell at least 10 people about SWIFTs. So in terms of the SWIFT local group, what we're hoping, as I said earlier, hoping to meet monthly. So in terms of time commitment, it'll be 1 evening meeting a month, and then some kind of like activities to do in between those meetings. And the activities you can kind of spend as much or as little time as possible within that. So if you want to respond to all the development plans, that's amazing. If you just want to respond to one, that's also amazing. Whatever you can manage. This is just a little reminder of how much of an impact we can all have. Yeah, it's been really wonderful with this project so far, reaching outside of the bubble with like working with roofers and the building industry. And Barrett's developments as well. And yeah, just that cheesy quote of you never know how far the ripples that you make can go. And obviously this picture is, yeah, reminding us all about the bubble thing. But yeah, in normal life you might have a wider reach of people, but at the minute it's the bubble that we're in. But still, that's really brilliant. So in terms of a suggested lineup, as I've said, really want this to be community-led, so it's very subject to the group's interests. There's not like a huge content about what there is to do. I've gone through most of it. There's some details that we can go over throughout the year, but a lot of it will be, yeah, there's space to add things to if people want to do talks or share information or share what they've been up to. That kind of thing as well is very flexible to add into the suggested lineup. So yeah, looking at the meeting in January, looking ahead to the meeting in January, that will very much so be about getting to know each other, keeping in mind diversity. So RSPB is really focused on equality, diversity and inclusion right now. It is a very white middle class organisation, as people within it will say. But we're trying to facilitate that to change, and a lot of that is looking at how we can create our groups to feel inclusive at least. So if there are any particular things that you need to feel included, like for me, I have dyslexia, so it's helpful for me to have audio recordings of things to better understand something. And there's different agreements we can make in terms of a group, in terms of maybe people of a certain background might talk a lot more than other people, kind of thing. So want to bring that sort of awareness at the very start of the volunteer group, so that that's kind of makes it more accessible to people. But we'll talk about more about that in January. In February, we can